Hi, everybody. Thanks a million for tuning in. I'm so delighted to be joined by Dr. Helen Ross. Helen, thank you so much for joining us.
That's all right. It's a pleasure to be here. Always nice to talk to people across a body of water. I like that.
Thank you. You're very good. So, Dr. Helen today is going to be sharing a wealth of information. We're going to be looking at well-being and dyslexia, some top essential tips. And Dr. Helen has a wealth of experience both in the educational and the dyslexia field, but also in the research area. So, we're so delighted to have her on board and share some essential tips and tricks. Helen, do you want to maybe give us a little bit of an overview and a background of some things that you're involved in or things that you've been
Yeah,
involved in previously?
gladly. What a privilege to be here as well. Thank you so much for asking me. It's a pleasure. Yeah, I said to you just before we started recording, I've sort of found myself working around well-being stuff, but to say it's a misnomer is not quite right. I've kind of ended up because it affects me, and like you see it in your kids when you teach and things. So, um, because I was 17 when I got picked up for being dyslexic. A-level maths, so like leaving cert equivalent, I would sit in class crying my eyes out because I couldn't read the question. My teacher was very gracious and very patient. I know it's hard to believe that I'm not subtle, hard to believe, but like, and it knocks the knock-on effect of that is huge, absolutely huge. I'm quite open about the fact I've been medicated for anxiety, I've had like depression and various things over the years, so it's been a thing. And just working in schools, and especially after COVID, like here, and I guess sort of globally, there's so much research on the post-COVID of mental health. I can't spell that. Um, and so I have a wonderful project with a lady called Beata Weinbauer out of she's from Vienna. And they've got an amazing book. Her and Dagmar, her business partner, have got an awesome book based in mindfulness sort of principles around kids supporting their own well-being, learning strategies. And so I was really lucky. Beata contacted me. I did some work around well-being with them. And it's just proper like inspired me. It's been such a privilege. And mindfulness is, I'm not an expert at all, like really not, but I use it a bit myself. And I'm kind of going down that rabbit hole. I've come out the other end. I had a few, like I call it a brain fart, like whoa, thoughts. And a little while ago, I had a thought, sort of driving home on the M25, like the road around London. And it's a really efficient car park, rubbish motorway, great car park. And I was chatting to a mate who I often call when I'm stuck on that road because it's where I've got signal, on my phone. And I just had this thought around kind of looking at well-being and schools, and it kind of cooked away for a bit. And from that, I got in touch via a women in academia support network on Facebook that is just full of amazing, amazing people. And I sort of through various permutations, I got in touch with two who helped me grow. So we together now have grown my little brain fart into something tangible. We've got some funding, and we're in the ethics process at the moment, which is lovely. No, but it is what it is and it matters. We've got to get it right. So we're going to hopefully go into some schools after Christmas and look at how in the classroom with little, so kids, I think we said between 8 and 10, I can't remember exactly. Um, Looking at how dyslexia impacts well-being, impacts interventions, and how they all kind of mesh, so that we can work out what's good and what's bad, and how to discern, because different kids have different preferences. And I was with Katrina Cochrane no, at some point in my life in the last month, I was in Cardiff, I don't know when, with Katrina Cochrane, and she really kindly asked me to do a talk on wellbeing. And oh my goodness, people were so kind and so gracious. So, because dyslexia is all encompassing. Yeah, reading and spelling. I hate reading. I've got a brain like a goldfish. My list of that's a book plan behind me because I can't remember it. People ask me what my book's about. I'm like, it's written on the wall. I don't know. Um, and I'm flippant and I'm confident, but kids aren't. I can be like, I don't remember because I've got all these letters after my name, and I seem to be not entirely daft. I'm dizzy, but I'm far from stupid. I'm quite happy. I'm silly, but I take my work incredibly seriously. So for me, dyslexia can have a huge well-being impact. It can be socially utterly debilitating because of the processing speed, the time lag between making sense of something and going, and joining in, like kids joining in with conversations. Like banter is like a quick tennis match. If you're a little bit behind, that's quite isolating. So it's spelling and reading is very measurable. But I think the other stuff that's less measurable, we're hoping to measure it with John Moores. It's all encompassing. So anything that eases that social burden has got to be a good thing as far as I'm concerned. And that's where I've kind of ended up.
Amazing. Sounds fabulous. And
I'm
you know,
lucky, very lucky.
there's so many things to unpack, I suppose, and address, and maybe from, let's say, going back even to your academic involvement as well, Helen, about the assessments piece, and that's probably maybe a good focal point to kick off things with, for students that of all age groups that may come, or be in that system of okay, maybe needing an assessment or haven't done that yet. What maybe suggestions might you have from being on the other end of maybe carrying them out as to what they could do maybe in advance of doing an assessment, or maybe their parents at home could
Oh my God,
prepare for it?
that's such, like, my lead time is a few months, like November, like 3.5 months is my lead time. Local authority lead time, I don't know. It's huge. So I think things like, and depending on the age of the kid, the British Dyslexia Association has like checklists. And I can't look at the website and I can't multitask, but there are excuse me, there are checklists for different age groups. They're aligned to the English system, so key stage 1, 2, 3, work out age groups, because if you Google Irish schools to British schools or English schools, there are ways, you Google it and you find the right age group. So you can look at where dyslexia hits people, but I think they also have strength-based bits as well. So they're quite useful to look at. And I think talk to kids, children know what they find difficult. I work with I'm at my ease with older kids because I'm secondary trained, but I work with a lot of kids who are kind of 8, 9, 10. They know where they're wobbling. And I think I hate reading. I do it because I have to. My computer reads to me. But there's such a pressure at the moment in English schools. You must teach children to love reading. Well, until we talk about teaching children to love algebra, which is an incredibly important life skill, if you're doing spreadsheets, if you're adding up shopping, if you're doing stock takes, you are doing algebra. And until we say algebra, you must love it, I'm not prepared to say you must love reading. You need to be able to do reading and access the written word. Absolutely. There needs to be a space for people to be allowed to find it difficult and not enjoy it. And for even if you've got a formal diagnosis, dyslexia has strengths, but people need to have the social space for it not to be a superpower. Sorry, my dog's barking. For it not to be a superpower and to find things difficult. Because if you deny that element, you kind of squish emotions, and I think that isn't good for anybody. And just for parents to would not engage. I spoke to his teacher this morning and he kicked up a stink, and I was like, oh, get to school. I'm quite a sentiment, he's 4, and I'm like, no, we're not faffing, just go to school. But we talked about, and I tried to sort of gently say what's tricky. Now he's 4, he's like, I just can't do it, Mum, I just don't like it. And at 4, okay, but try and gently talk to them so that you can take the pressure off, because I think constantly pushing doesn't help either. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. Yeah, and I suppose there's a growth in Ireland definitely post COVID around the school refusal aspect, and that has taken place and
Oh
taken
yes.
light an awful lot more so than maybe what it did in previous eras of school cycles. And if somebody's tuning in and wants to know a little bit more about that, obviously that's quite a detailed topic, and needs to be managed kind of in an individual basis, and
Absolutely.
the approach is very different as to how it's dealt with to help move through that with the most ease as possible, and definitely seeking additional help might be supportive in that area. And as you mentioned, then maybe Helen, from a school base, so the students that you've worked with, even in a school context, in that anxiety or stress level field, maybe even from like a teacher base of how you might spot that in a student, and then what might be some reaction tools that a teacher could use to help a student kind of move through their own individual stress levels.
Yeah, I think body language quite often. Particularly if you've got a student who's quiet, because some people are just quiet. And I think it's harder to spot with quiet, like compliant children. But when you if you're like, what did they call it? That there was a kid I assessed the other day, and she was so clever, like amazingly bright, like so clever. But she talks about reading, and she physically recoiled. Like, I was like, I'm really sorry, you've got to do some reading now. And she knew, and we talked it through. I was like, I feel horrible. I'm like, I feel so bad getting kids to do stuff like that. But she physically recoiled. And she talked about when she's put on the spot, like, they do that thing where like Johnny, it's your turn to read, Jenny, Pete, and they kind of dot around the classroom. And she just said she hides. She does that, kind of sinks into her chair and kind of makes herself small. And you can see, and I think it's really important to be aware of that body language aspect, or why kids kind of all of a sudden start fidgeting. I've got a spinny chair that when they're being assessed, and I and ah whether it's a good idea because it's a spinny chair. But actually no, I stick with it because it's very tangible to see when somebody's fidgeting. And I write into my assessments that during this bit Jenny was fidgeting, she was spinning on the chair, because you can see it. And they're not going to do themselves a nasty because it's a really solid spinny chair. I'm so like, don't break yourself. But that's because I'm paranoid and children are important. But it's that body language. And I think in a classroom, if you see a kid kind of wobbling like that, a spot, like making children read in a classroom setting. This is, and I absolutely separate this from the kind of reading practice that you do one-to-one in small groups, because that matters. Keep doing that gently with compassion, but keep doing it because it matters. But it's that dotting around a class when everyone's got to read, and like, no, let kids volunteer, or give them warning that at this point you're going to read these 2 sentences, so they've got time to get the brains in gear, and they know they've had a bit of a chance to familiarize themselves. If you've got somebody who finds something difficult, and then you're compounding that with the like all eyes on you thing, that they can be like a rabbit in headlights. Not every child. This is why it's really important to kind of talk to the kids and their families about what works, because some kids are like, yeah, I love to read. But I think time and warning, and don't put people on the spot, is just, that's the simple, and that costs nothing. That's quick, it's easy, dead straightforward.
Completely. Yeah, I remember from my experience, it completely resonates, that
Oh,
alertness and just, oh my
I know.
God, I have to do it next. And the problem is of what I notice, I suppose, in my own patterns, but also in the students that we work with in a one-to-one or even in a group setting, is
Mm.
the lack of then retention from all of the rest of the context. So
Because they're focusing on, oh my God, I've got to read.
I remember you counting the sentences, and I could have been like halfway through the class. So I would count the sentence, then I get distracted, then I'd have to recount. So I haven't a notion what's going on in the rest of the story. I'm trying to figure out, am I in sentence 20? Am I in sentence 21? And then I'll reread it, say it out as best as I can, and then will be so exhausted that when they read out the rest of the sentence for the rest of the class, I still won't take that in
It's
either.
just,
So the whole
yeah,
lot of it actually is just built around, will I know these particular words to say them in front of everybody else so I don't
yeah,
get, caught out, and then not having a notion. I'd walk out of the class being like, what did we even do? I
yeah,
would have an absolute clue of recall. And we see that with so many students, so not only are there the anxiety levels, it's also the
yeah.
time induced, and it's also the fact that they don't actually
Mm.
remember or retain possibly the information because they're under the fight or flight mechanism, so it's not actually being stored in the brain. So it definitely is something that I think as some systems are moving away from a lot, and hopefully more and more teachers will move away from that context a little bit more. And I suppose we get a lot of questions, Helen, around, the sleep and the patterns and how essential they are for our overall wellness. And we know through
Mm.
studies and neurodiversity how important that rest period is,
Yes.
because of how overactive or
Hard.
yes, how hard basically we're working to get through the school system and a daily life. And what essential tips might you give even maybe to parents, Ellen, of, kind of trying to hone in on that pattern so that there's enough rest time for the actual child at home?
I think this is a really difficult one because different families, their dynamics are different. I know with my little boy, I am not going to make him do his reading right before bed. Because I saw how he literally squirms. He's like a wriggle bum. I'm a wriggle bum. I'm in a spinny chair, and under my table, I'm like going 10 to the dozen. Um, so I would say take the pressure off right next to bed, because if your adrenaline's kicking off and you've got to do your reading, your reading log or whatever you call it at school, just before you go to bed, well, that's not conducive to relaxing. So there is the option here. Some schools are able to facilitate people going in they host a tutor during the school day, because it just means kids aren't bombarded all day every day and then more after school, because it can just be too much. They're little humans. I call my little boy, we were like small human, that's what we call, he's a little human. He's not fully grown. They're not fully fledged adults, so they haven't got the stamina, and they need to be able to run outside like plonkers and let all their energy out because they're children. So I think sometimes not pushing stuff is as important as pushing it.
Yes,
If
completely. And
that
as
makes
you
sense.
say, that's so individualistic as well, depending upon household
Mm.
circumstances, what's more of a
Yeah,
priority in other centres and not in others. And it's all, I
yeah,
suppose, in that, pattern. And then it's important to recognize that things evolve and change, as we move
yeah,
different cycles as a student gets older, if they more exams or things ease in certain areas and things get a little bit more
yeah,
challenging, there is definitely that need for further support, either internally or externally, or either a
yeah,
combination of both
exactly that.
things to help, perform in the best way
Absolutely.
possible, but also that downtime is really essential, and how that's, I suppose, created is really paramount to their
Yeah,
overall.
definitely.
Really. That's great, Helen. And any last minute tips or tricks, Helen, or how can people get in touch with you if they want to keep up to date with some of the things that you're
Oh,
involved
wow. I haven't written a blog for ages. I need to pull my finger out and do that, but I'm human. And yesterday I was like, no, I'm going to watch a silly film on Netflix. I would say a bug are dyslexic and getting kept in at break time to finish their work, unless they've actively been prattling around, because dyslexia and being a wally at times, we're human, we can all be wallies. But if somebody's always losing their break because they're not getting work finished, there's more to it. Teachers, please ask questions. Kids need their break. They need to run. They'll be off kilter. It's just, I've had to write that into reports. Like I shouldn't have to write that into a report. It just shouldn't be on my radar, as it were. And I would say, yeah, at Dr. Helen Ross, or I'm on LinkedIn. I think it's Helen Louise Ross. I can't. If you Google Dr. Helen Ross, British Dyslexia Association, you'll find me on various different platforms. I can't remember my own handles. I'm
with.
dyslexic. Don't remember.
Okay, Helen. I'm sure people will find you on different paths anyway.
Yeah, and I'll do what I can if I can help people. Of course, I will.
Thank you. You're very kind, and it's such a pleasure to have you on board, and to share all your insights along the way is so useful. And thank you very much for, giving us your time. It's great
Always,
to have you on.
always. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege.
Thanks, Helen. You're very good.